Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we will be looking at Hajj, our pilgrimage to the house of Allah, Baytullah, the Kaaba, and also some of the importance of the city of Mecca. Now, the first thing that we see in the month of Ramadan, as we recite some of the du'as and the supplications which are recommended in this month, is that a major part of the prayer and the supplication and what we ask of Allah in this month is that He count us among those who are able to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca. وَاكْتُبْنِي مِنْ حُجَّاجِ بَيْتِكَ الْحَرَامِ. Write me among those who are going to be able to perform Hajj. So in this month of fasting, we are told that our prayers are answered. We should ask for our worldly and our spiritual needs. And yet in the du'as that are taught to us by Ahlul Bayt, what is repeated perhaps as frequently as anything else or more frequently than anything else, aside from forgiveness from sins, but in terms of what we are asking Allah for, it is to be able to perform Hajj. Now, it was after the month of Ramadan when in times past people would often make the preparations for Hajj and then they would set out on that journey, especially those who lived within a few weeks or a few months journey. But it is not just a matter of that time frame. It is a general principle that our acts of worship, they do build upon one another and they do prepare us for one another. There is a similarity between prayer and fasting and Hajj, or pilgrimage, in that all of them involve a certain self-deprivation from certain things that we normally do not think twice about doing. There is a different time frame, a different length of time, and there are different things that we are abstaining from, but that abstention is shared. In prayer, when we recite Takbiratul Ihram, then we are making certain things haram for ourselves. We are making certain things forbidden for ourselves for the duration of the prayer. And salam in the prayer is the tahleel of the prayer, which contrasts with ihram. When we begin the prayer, we make certain things forbidden for ourselves, and when we say salam at the end of the prayer, that is the tahleel. That is when they become permitted for us again. So it is a daily practice for turning our attention away from this world towards Allah. And that effort is to be made while we are engaged in our daily affairs. We do not have that recommendation that we should pray in a way that is completely separate from the daily life and the hustle bustle of our lives. It is, for example, makruh to close our eyes in prayer. Although, of course, if you want to concentrate and there might be distractions in front of you, it would probably make it easier to concentrate if you close your eyes. And yet that is makruh in prayer. And ulama have discussed that what should a person do if they are getting distracted, and the only way for them to avoid that distraction is to close their eyes. That would be an exception, as mentioned by some of our ulama like Shahid al-Awwal. But the general rule is that prayer is to abstain from things that you normally do while still maintaining yourself within the flow of your daily life or your routine. Fasting is a little bit more of an extended practice of abstention. It isn't just for a few minutes, but it is for the entire day. And we are abstaining from a broader range of things for a period of time. So fasting prepares us for that exercise of willpower. And in one sense, and according to some ahadith as well, Hajj is now the pinnacle of that type of preparation. To be able to turn our back to our daily life and the comforts that we have in our daily life, to actually spend something. Salat doesn't really require an expense, and Sawm does not necessarily require an expense. In fact, for those of us who come and eat our iftars at the masjid, in a sense we are saving one meal unless we are sponsoring one of those meals. at the center for others to also partake in. But there is no expense involved in prayer. There is no expense involved in fasting. But there is an expense and a longer-term sacrifice and a level of trust in Allah and reliance in Allah that is involved in Hajj. And so Hajj is a very special act of worship. Pilgrimage has existed in one form or another in many other religions aside from Islam, and it has a special importance within Islam. In Surah Hajj, in the Quran, we are told that this was actually a teaching that was first promulgated by Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is known as the father of Tawheed, the father of monotheism and the three main monotheistic religions. And part of his teaching of monotheism was his honoring of the house of Allah and his instruction to his descendants and to his followers to perform pilgrimage to the Kaaba. In verse number 27 and part of verse 28 of Surah Al-Hajj, we read, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا وَعَلَى كُلِّ ضَامِرٍ يَأْتِينَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ وَيَذْكُرُوا اسْمَ اللَّهِ. That instruction was given to Ibrahim alayhi salam, that call people to the Hajj, so that they will come to you on foot and on every weary, burdened animal, that they will come from every valley and every distant land, so that they will لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ, so that they will be able to witness certain benefits that are present in the pilgrimage for them. Pilgrimage is our time to practice abstinence, to practice sacrificing in the way of Allah, to make that commitment that if we are ever called on to make a greater sacrifice, we will be ready for it, mentally and spiritually, and we have made that commitment. But there are also benefits that come to us as individuals and to our Muslim community, and in fact to humanity, from Hajj. If you've ever read some of the histories of Hajj, much of the intellectual advancement and much of even the political advancement and different movements for reform throughout Islamic history, they were either begun or they got their strength and they got their momentum when individuals from different parts of the Muslim world would go for Hajj. It was a time for the exchange of ideas. It was a time for scholarship and for learning and for the transfer of books and many other forms of religious knowledge, information, and also that spiritual connection between different forms of humanity. Throughout history, the primary identity of most people was their tribe, or their ethnicity, or their linguistic group, or their country, whatever form it may have taken in different eras. And we might think that today we have international organizations, we have the United Nations, we have a sense of common humanity. But when you really look at the operative motivations that people have and the factors that make up most people's identity, we are probably almost as tribal, almost as prejudiced as some of those primitive people that we might read about in history. It might take a different form, but Hajj is an opportunity for us to actually come and see humanity in its diversity, in its different classes, in its different levels of culture and economic and political and intellectual development, and then to develop a sympathy with humanity as a whole. So there is a worldly benefit, a societal benefit, but then there is a spiritual benefit that also comes with the pilgrimage, and these are mentioned in the Quran. لِيَشْهَدُوا مَنَافِعَ لَهُمْ. Our Imams have said that this is not just referring to the spiritual benefits of Hajj. It is to have material benefits, it is to bring people together materially, and it is also to be a source for spiritual development. So what is that type of spiritual development? There is a verse of Surah Al-Dhariyat, verse number 50, in which the message is given to the believers, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنِّي لَكُمْ نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. Flee to your Lord. And the messenger says that I am to you a clear warner. I'm giving you a warning of a punishment that awaits the evildoers in the hereafter. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. So flee to your Lord. And that is what Hajj represents. The journey to our Lord is not a journey through space, but it is a journey through a higher level of awareness and conscience and an awareness of our duty to Allah, our need of Allah. So it is a hijrah that can take place in one geographical area, but the ability to forsake our land and all that is familiar for us, that physical journey or that geographical migration facilitates our spiritual migration. In a hadith, this verse has been explained in terms of both types of journey. There is a tafsir which says that it is فِرُّوا مِنْ عِقَابِهِ إِلَى الْإِيمَانِ وَالتَّوْحِيدِ وَمُلَازَمَةِ الطَّاعَةِ. On a very basic level, this verse is saying, flee from the punishment of God which awaits those who do evil, to having faith, and to believing in one God, the origin of humanity, which is the basis for our oneness and our relationship with all of humanity. وَمُلَازَمَةِ الطَّاعَةِ. And flee to obeying God. But then there is also a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, where he says that this verse refers, فِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, it means حُجُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Make the pilgrimage and go and visit the house of Allah. These two commentaries, as we have seen in many different verses, they are not contradictory, they are mutually complementary. They both come to the same conclusion: to flee from God's punishment, to appreciate Tawheed both in the sense of one God and the result of the belief in one God, which is our relationship with humanity and our attachment to and our love for humanity and our desire to serve humanity, and our fleeing from disobeying God towards mulazamat al-ta'a and obeying God, that is facilitated by the journey of Hajj. So there is a great deal of importance in Hajj. There are ahadith that come from both Sunni and Shi'i sources in different words, but with the similar meaning, that if a person does not go on Hajj when they are able to do so, in the words of Imam Ja'far Sadiq, "Man mata wa lam yahujja hijjat al-Islam," a person who dies without having performed the obligatory pilgrimage of Hijjatul Islam, لم يمنعه من ذلك حاجة تجحف به أو مرض لا يطيق فيه الحج أو سلطان يمنعه منه, without having a valid excuse of sickness, of some kind of financial need or difficulty, perhaps political difficulties in our time, that might be visa difficulties or other types of issues which would prevent a person from going for Hajj. If there isn't a valid reason for a person not to go for Hajj, فَلْيَمُتْ يَهُودِيًّا أَوْ نَصْرَانِيًّا, let that person die a member of any religion that they want to die, but they cannot die as a Muslim. So it is something which has been emphasized a great deal in these terms. Perhaps few other acts of worship, even our other obligations, have been emphasized in this way. The importance of Hajj, though, is not just because of the threat of punishment. That should never be our motivation for doing anything. We want to be aware of the importance of what an obligation is. An obligation is an obligation because if we don't do it, then we have to be aware of the consequences. But the motivation is something which should be coming from what good comes out of that act of worship. If Allah made something an obligation, and if He will punish those who don't do it, then He didn't do so simply so that He has an excuse to punish people. It's not like a municipality that has budget problems in this, so they say, let's have some red light cameras and speed cameras and try to see how we can get more people. There was no prison industrial complex in the hereafter that needs to profit from a greater number of incarcerated people. But Allah makes things an obligation because they are so important for our spiritual development and advancement that avoiding them is a crime against ourselves. So that if I don't do this, then I am damaging my soul. That is why Allah would make something an obligation. In other words, it is a benefit that comes back to us. So why is Hajj so important? There is a hadith told by our sixth Imam that a person, an Arabi, a Bedouin Arab, came to the Prophet of Islam. And he said that, I had made the intention for going to Hajj. I left home, but ثم فاتني. I was unable to actually make it to Mecca. So I have a good deal of wealth. Tell me, what is it that I can do with my possessions so that I can achieve the same reward as somebody who would go for pilgrimage? It was my intention to go. I wanted to, but I wasn't able to. So what can I do that would make me attain the same reward? Now, the Prophet, he gave a lengthy answer which details some of the rewards of different actions that take place in Hajj. But the Prophet began by saying that take a look at Abu Qubays. The person had previously been to Mecca, was familiar with the geography of Mecca. They just missed the Hajj that year, but they were there. He said that if you look at Abu Qubays and you imagine that you have that amount of gold that you see in that mountain, an entire mountain of gold, and then you spent it all in the path of Allah, you would not be able to achieve the reward that comes to those who perform pilgrimage. And that is a very important principle, and we will see other examples of that in ahadith. The value of Hajj and the value of worship and devotion as a whole is not something that is to be appreciated simply on material terms. It's not something that we can calculate with the normal type of economic analysis that we are used for, that we are accustomed to. There might be something that we think is a very good use of our money, a very good charity, a very good cause. But if the opportunity for Hajj presents itself, then it might have a lesser expense, but much more benefit and much more spiritual reward, and even actual benefit in human terms as well. We will talk about that. But in this hadith, the Prophet says that the reward of a pilgrim is not just a matter of, well, you have money to spend and you can afford to pay an equal amount so you can buy yourself that reward. Going and doing and performing and benefiting, that is what causes that reward. In another hadith, a companion of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, alayhi salatu was salam, he said, قُلْتُ لَهُ حِجَّةٌ أَفْضَلْ أَمْ عِتْقُ رَقَبَةٌ. Tell me, is it better for me to free a slave? And we all know that to free a slave is one of the greatest things that a person can do in Islam. It is an atonement for different sins. It is something which is a great reward. It was the practice of the Prophet and the practice of the Imams to try to buy slaves and to prepare them to live free and then to set them free. So that was an act of worship. But when he asked the Imam, is it better for me to go for Hajj, or perhaps with the same money that I would use to go for Hajj, is it better for me to free a slave? The Imam says, Hajj is better. It is better to do Hajj. And then Muawiyah, he asked more. Muawiyah ibn Ammar, he was a companion of our sixth Imam and well known for his scholarship and also especially for his expertise in Hajj. He said that I continued to ask, well, what about if I were to free, for example, more than one slave, 5 slaves? Is that better, or Hajj? And the Imam still said, Hajj is better. حتى بلغت 30 فقال حجة أفضل. I got to 30, freeing 30 slaves or going for Hajj. And still the Imam said that going for Hajj is better. Now, on a purely material analysis, that might seem to be far-fetched. Obviously, freedom is something that every human being values. And as we have said, it is something that Islam values very highly, to the extent that zakat can be spent in order to help people who are enslaved purchase their freedom. So Islam eradicated slavery in this way, organically, and by trying to assist people in being ready for freedom and then being able to live free. So it's important. It's something that all of us intrinsically feel. But the Imam says that Hajj is better than freeing one person or even than freeing 30 people. And the reason for that may have been, in addition to the reward and the blessings and honoring the house of Allah, but on a level that we can understand, it may have been that Hajj has an effect on an individual. There are times when I might be able to do a great deal of good, but I don't have it in me. And so if I see a worthy cause, maybe an assistance for some charity, my heart is not soft enough and not sympathetic enough, and I don't have that spiritual awareness, and I don't have that tawfiq from Allah. So I might just write a very quick check for $10 or $15. And there might be another time when I see that same scene, but my heart is in a different state. My soul is in a different state. My resources superficially have not changed, but I am motivated and I am able to do a great deal more. Not only will I write the check, but I may actually follow up with that organization. I may actually see if there's any other way that I can assist. So Hajj changes a person in this way. If you were just looking at the spending of money, the $5,000 that you spend in Hajj may be able to provide food, or it may be able to provide a scholarship for a student for a certain number of time. But the analysis is not just on that level. Hajj will change who you are. It will change perhaps what you will be able to earn in the future, and more importantly, it will change your heart and your motivation for how you will spend your time and how you will spend your assets and your resources in the future. So don't take this hadith with the understanding that the Imam is saying that, well, spending this money on your own worship is more important than the freedom of those 30 people. It's not more important than the freedom of those 30 people. For you to make that decision is more important, so that you will become the kind of person who can contribute not just to the freedom of 30 people, but many, many other ways also for the betterment of humanity. So this is one example that we have of the importance of Hajj. In addition to pilgrimage itself, there is a value and an importance on the place where pilgrimage takes place. Mecca itself has a great deal of significance and importance. There is a hadith which says that surrounding the Kaaba in Mecca, there are 120 types of mercy that exist. 60 of those forms of mercy belong to those who are doing tawaf, who are circling the Kaaba. 40 of those types of mercy belong to those who are praying in the precincts of Masjid al-Haram. So tawaf has the greater reward at that place and at that time. Salat has a lesser reward, but still a very significant amount of blessings. وَعِشْرُونَ لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. But there is even 20 forms of mercy which are exclusive for those who are just sitting in front of the Kaaba and looking. And of course, when you look at the Kaaba, you are looking at people who are worshiping. You are deriving a benefit from their sincerity and also seeing the glory of Allah, that it is His house, which has no attraction, no other reason for people to go but to answer His call. So Mecca is a very important place, although we have the reminder, especially with regard to Mecca, and we'll talk about it also with ziyarat of other sacred places, that a person should not overdo it. Because Mecca is a good place to go, it doesn't mean that you should just spend your entire time there, because sometimes we are not ready to derive benefit from staying in a place that is very sacred and is very blessed beyond a certain amount. Right? Every container can only take so much as it is able to hold. You might take a small container to an ocean, you won't be able to fill the water of the ocean into it. So depending on what our container can hold, that is how long we should stay in a place like Mecca. And there are ahadith that tell us that a person should not stay in Mecca, for example, longer than a year. There was always that custom of jiwar or mujawara. A person would be known as mujawir of Mecca by staying in Mecca. And there are ahadith that say a person should not stay too long, because you might then take for granted the nearness of the Kaaba. And that is far worse than being away and wanting to go, to be close and taking it for granted and saying, well, I can play at home. There is also another part to this hadith which is important. Unfortunately, it is not practiced by the current authorities that are in charge of those sacred places. لا ينبغي أن يرفع بناء فوق الكعبة. It is not proper for any structure to be built such that it overshadows the Kaaba. That is something which is not to be done. The original form of these places should be preserved, their character should be preserved, and the Kaaba should be visually as well as spiritually, the center of focus and attention in Mecca. Unfortunately, that is something which is not being practiced, but there are ahadith that when the Imam comes, one of those things that he will do is he will restore the performance of Hajj and the structure of the places of Hajj to their proper form, and not allow this type of a commercialized and bastardized form of the vicinity of Mecca to remain. What are some of the benefits of Hajj that we have in ahadith? One is that a person who performs pilgrimage is sort of, I don't know if any of you used to play video games, children certainly do. Sometimes there are different ways where you can become invincible from having any kind of attack against you for a period of time. There is an invincibility that comes with performing Hajj, which ahadith say lasts for 4 months, except if a person does a kabira, a major sin. It's not a license to go and to commit a major sin. But the minor sins that a person sometimes does without realizing it, that type of sin is something that a person is protected from, has that 4-month invincibility after returning from Mecca. So it is something that provides that immediate benefit. Your good deeds are written, but your evil deeds are not recorded at all for that 4-month period. The Prophet has said that both Hajj and Umrah, if a person is not able to go for Hajj, then also Umrah, they have the same effect on poverty that if you go to an ironsmith and when he treats iron and purifies iron and then makes things out of it, that same type of a purifying effect by expelling poverty, expelling hardship. So that expense is one which opens up many doors, materially as well as spiritually for a person. And in one comprehensive hadith, we are told that there are 3 types of people who go for Hajj. There is one type that will be freed from hellfire. If they are sincere enough, if they are committed enough, then that one pilgrimage might be what will cause Allah to say this person is not going to be punished in hellfire at all. Another group, which is not quite that noble or quite that sincere, will have a clean slate. Whatever sins they may have committed until that time will be wiped clean. But they may still have that risk of undoing it in the future. It depends on the level of a person's faith and spirituality. But then there is a third group, and even that third group has a very important benefit. They might not have a guarantee of paradise, and they might not have a clean slate when they come back, but they will be protected يُحْفَظُ فِي أَهْلِهِ وَمَالِهِ, in their families, in their possessions. At least they will have that material benefit. They will have protection from harm. وَهُوَ أَدْنَى مَا يَرْجِعُ بِهِ الْحَاجِ. That is the very least that somebody who goes for Hajj will be able to return from, to be able to get. Another hadith says that when you go for Hajj, you will be given health in your bodies. You will be given a wider rizq and sustenance. It will be a source for abundance. Your faith will become stronger, and you will become free of need from having to procure the support for your family and for your dependents. Allah will provide assistance in meeting your needs. So there are many of these types of benefits, worldly, material, and spiritual benefits. Other ahadith can give us more details, but this is basically the types of benefits that have been mentioned for Hajj, and they are great benefits. But one important thing is that the benefits do not only come to me. When we find out what the benefits of Hajj, we might think that, well, I'm going to go for Hajj as often as I can. And some of the ahadith spell out that a person who goes for Hajj 2 years in a row has an even greater reward. A person who goes 3 years in a row, up until a person who might go 10 or 15 or 20 or even 40 years, that person will have a great deal of benefit and a great deal of reward, being able to intercede for others in the hereafter, having a guaranteed place in paradise. There were people in history and even today who have gone for Hajj tens of times in order to get that benefit. But the fact that Hajj has all these benefits should not make us selfish. And it certainly should not make us jealous of those who are going for Hajj. The benefits come beyond the person who is actually performing that pilgrimage. There is one hadith which says that مَا مِن رَجُلٍ مِنْ أَهْلِ كُورَةٍ وَقَفَ بِعَرَفَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِلَّا غَفَرَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لِأَهْلِ تِلْكَ الْكُورَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That if a person from a village goes for Hajj, and that person stands and prays in Arafah, then Allah provides His grace and His forgiveness for all members of that town. There is an effect that that town, that culture has, which may have motivated a person to go for Hajj. And so they might deserve a part of the reward for being a town that honors its Hujjaj and that encourages people to go for Hajj. And even if some people may not have been individually involved in encouraging that act of worship, they will all benefit from the blessings of one person from a village or from a town going for Hajj. And also, if a member of a family goes for Hajj, then when they stand and pray in Arafah, Allah says that He will forgive all of the members of that family. So if my cousin goes for Hajj, or if my brother goes for Hajj, I shouldn't say that, well, if only I were in their shoes. It should be something that we consider to be an act of worship that will come back and that will benefit us as well. There are some ahadith, according to ahadith. There are some ahadith that indicate that certain sins cannot be sought the forgiveness of without going to Arafah. In a hadith attributed to our sixth Imam, إِنَّ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ ذُنُوبًا لَا يُكَفِّرُهَا إِلَّا الْوُقُوفُ بِعَرَفَةٍ. That only standing in Arafah and asking Allah's forgiveness at that place and at that time can really truly atone for those sins. If a person is unable, then Allah in His grace, He might be able to forgive them even if we don't go there. But the kafara for that sin, there are times when we are not able to do the kafara and Allah might still forgive us. But the kafara for those sins, if they are that great, it is to stand in Arafah, which means to be able to go for Hajj. So when we speak about the benefits of Hajj and we say that there are benefits for others, that has an implication. One implication is that we should try to include others in our Hajj. If I have already done my obligatory Hajj, then it is good for me to think how I can do a Hajj for somebody else. It can be for my parents, but it doesn't have to be just my parents. Every good child will do something good for one's parents, but also for other relatives, for other people who are not relatives, who might have been good to me. There is a hadith which says that if a person does Hajj and then names 1,000 people, then all of those 1,000 people will get the full reward for Hajj, and that person will get the reward for their Hajj as well, without any kind of deficiency coming in. And a hadith also states that if a person sends others for Hajj, and that is something which is very highly recommended, and it was a very common practice of the wealthy companions of the Imams. They would sometimes say that I am either going to go for Hajj every year, or I am going to send somebody for Hajj every year. So it isn't just a matter of, well, if I can't go this year, then I might go in a future year. Who knows if I'm going to survive in a future year? Send somebody else in this year to do that Hajj on behalf of somebody that you might have made the intention for, or somebody else. There is a hadith which says that لِلَّذِي يَحِجُّ عَنِ الرَّجُلِ أَجْرٌ وَثَوَابٌ عَشْرِ حِجَجٍ. A person who does Hajj on behalf of somebody else, they will have the reward of 10 pilgrimages themselves. And then the hadith continues, and it says, who else will have that reward? وَيُغْفَرُ لَهُ وَلِأَبِيهِ وَلِأُمِّهِ وَلِابْنِهِ وَلِابْنَتِهِ وَلِأَخِيهِ وَلِعَمِّهِ وَلِعَمَّتِهِ وَلِخَالِهِ وَلِخَالَتِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاسِعٌ كَرِيمٌ. Basically, all of their extended family, themselves, parents, children, uncles, aunts, everybody will be included in the forgiveness for that Hajj. So it is something that it is worth investing in as a family, for us to encourage ourselves and to send other members of our family for Hajj as a community, to ensure that this act of worship, it has its proper place within our practice. There are some ahadith that indicate that Hajj should be done regularly, and if a person can afford it, it should be done with some frequency. In one hadith, a person who is able to afford it easily, but does not do Hajj even once in 5 years, and again, that might be by sending somebody for Hajj, that person is called إِنَّهُ لَمَحْرُومٌ. That person has deprived themselves of divine favor. In one hadith, Imam Ali Rida alayhi salatu wassalam, this is a very beautiful hadith. He says, "Man hajja bi thalathatin min al-mu'minin, faqad ishtara nafsahu min Allahi bi-thaman." A person who sends 3 people to go and perform Hajj. 3 people to go and perform Hajj. That person has purchased his soul from Allah through having paid the price of that soul. So no longer is it just a matter of a divine favor that He will send that person to paradise. But Allah will say, no, I owe it to you. You have your soul, you have purchased it from me. That person will have a right to go to paradise. Allah will... now Allah is the one who gives us that resource. He is the one who allowed us to be able to purchase from Himself. But He honors us in that way. And then the hadith continues, وَلَمْ يَسْأَلْهُ مِنْ أَيْنَ اكْتَسَبَ مَالَهُ مِنْ حَلَالٍ أَوْ حَرَامٍ. And Allah will not ask that person, because they have purchased their soul. On the Day of Judgment, Allah will not ask that person, where did you earn your money from? Was it from halal or was it from haram? Now, that doesn't mean that you can steal $1 million and spend $20,000, send 3 people to Hajj, and that you have now no worries about where you earned your money from. Ulama have explained that this is referring to, of course, a place where a person has done tawbah. A person has tried, tawbah means that you have made amends for what you have done wrong. But there are certain times when I might have lived kind of carelessly. I might have had a store and I would cut corners, and probably thousands of people might have been harmed by my carelessness or my negligence or my deliberate improper actions. I can't go back because I would never know who they are and how I could make amends. So in these types of circumstances where we have asked forgiveness and where we cannot make amends, but there are people who we have wronged, Allah will not ask us about it. In the explanation given by Shaykh Saduq, he says that one of the things that it may mean is that if we have creditors whom we owe things to in the hereafter, Allah will go and say, can you forgive this person, or how can I make it up on behalf of this person? Because this person is owed a debt of paradise by me, so how can I make up whatever wrong they have done to you so that they can go to paradise? So the hadith is not license to wrong other people, but it is a very meaningful and a very inspiring standard that many of us who have the financial means can aspire to send 3 people to be able to perform Hajj. We are out of time, so I will just quote 2 more ahadith. With regard to the etiquette of Hajj, it is narrated from our 4th Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, that when he would prepare himself for Hajj and he would do ghusl and put on the ihram, and when he would want to do talbiyah, when he would want to say labbaik, the Imam would begin to speak, and then his color would change and his body would begin to shake and convulse, and his words would get stuck in his throat, and he would not be able to say that simple 2-syllable labbaik, or labbaik Allahumma labbaik. And people observed and noticed and sometimes would say things without their knowledge and understanding that, son of the Messenger of Allah, you have to say these words. He knew better what he had to say. But the Imam, when he was asked, he said that أخشى أن أقول لبيك اللهم لبيك فيقال لي لا لبيك. I am afraid that I will say labbaik, O Allah, and Allah will say, you are coming and saying that you're answering my call. Where were you when you were asked to do what simple things I asked you to do? So the Imam is saying that I am afraid to say labbaik. With what tongue am I going to say to Allah that I'm answering His call? And that is a lesson that we have, not just for when we go for Hajj, but throughout our time. We recite words of the Qur'an, we pray, and there are a hadith that there are people who recite words of the Qur'an, and the Qur'an is cursing them at the same time. Because the Qur'an says, لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. May Allah curse those who are oppressing other people, and we are oppressing people. لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. May Allah curse those who are tellers of lies, and yet we do not keep our tongues safe. And with that, we will conclude, inshaAllah. We will be looking at some of the instructions that we have from Ahlul Bayt with regard to ziyarat in our next session, inshaAllah. on Friday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.